I saw the HOA mark my home, abandoned. While I was in the hospital, proof made them pay my mortgage. The orange sticker on my front door looked like something you'd see on a condemned building. Notice, property determined abandoned by Cedar Hollow HOA. I stood there on the cracked front step, wind cutting through my hospital wristband, my 2-year-old on my hip, and 7 months of pregnancy pressing on my lungs. The last time I'd walked through that door, I was being loaded into an ambulance, praying my baby would make it. Now, my own home was labeled like trash left on the curb. The lock had been changed. My doormat was gone. A paper tag flapped under the notice, pending lien and recovery actions. My son patted the sticker and asked, "Mommy broken?" I swallowed hard. They knew I was a military widow. They knew this house was all we had left of my husband. And still, instead of checking if I was alive, the HOA had already moved on to carving up the remains. I didn't have energy for a screaming match. I barely had energy to stand, but I did have one thing left. I knew how to keep going when everything in you wants to quit. If you've ever been bullied by paperwork and people hiding behind policy, stay with me and subscribe, because this is the part where the HOA learns what happens when they mark the wrong woman's home, abandoned. They had no idea I was already documenting everything. By the time I was standing on that porch with the orange sticker, I already felt like I'd lived 3 lifetimes. Before Cedar Hollow, my world was simple in a way that only people who've survived chaos understand. My husband, Mark, was Army. We bounced between bases, counted deployments and holidays missed, and measured time in care packages and bad Wi-Fi calls. When they folded the flag and put it in my hands, this house became more than a mortgage. It was the first place we'd picked together, the street where he joked about teaching John to ride a bike, the patch of grass where he'd said, "This is it, Han, somewhere quiet, somewhere we can breathe." After he died, I didn't breathe. Not really. I existed. The only reason I got through those first months was structure. I made lists for everything: bills, diapers, appointments, thank you notes. It wasn't about being organized. It was survival. If something was written down, it couldn't sneak up on me and knock me over. So when my pregnancy with the second baby got complicated and my OB said, "You need help? You can't do this alone," I listened. My parents live an hour away. We packed up John, a week's worth of clothes, and I told myself I'd be gone for a little while, just until the blood pressure came down, just until the doctor stopped looking worried. That little while turned into emergency admissions, bed rest, and days that blurred together in fluorescent light. I had monitors strapped to my belly and 4 in my arm, and my phone permanently plugged into the wall because I was terrified I'd miss some bill or notice. Even in that hospital bed, I was paying HOA dues online, flagging emails, setting reminders. Every night, my dad would say, "House is fine. Mail's inside. Lights on a timer. Grass is cut." He'd been picking up our mail twice a week, parking in the driveway, making sure the world knew someone was still there. We weren't abandoning anything. We were fighting to stay alive. In my head, Cedar Hollow was still what it had been when Mark and I first moved in. Kids on scooters, flags on porches, neighbors who waved. The HOA was just background noise back then. Annoying newsletters about trash cans and friendly reminders about holiday decorations. The first time I met Karen, she'd been standing in the clubhouse in a blazer that was a little too stiff for a Tuesday afternoon, clutching a binder like it was a weapon. "We like to keep things very orderly here," she'd said, smiling without actually smiling. I'd chalked it up to personality. I didn't know yet that orderly was her favorite word for "I get to decide if you belong." When Mark died, she sent a card. It was one of those generic sympathy cards, clearly pulled from a bulk box, signed "From the board." Not even my name spelled right. It bothered me for half a second. Then life steamrolled over the thought. Looking back, That little card was a preview. To Karen, people weren't people. We were line items, account numbers, compliance or non-compliance. By the time I hit my 3rd week in the hospital, I'd started a new list in the Notes app on my phone. Things to fix when I get home. Replace the porch light. Weed the back flower bed. Call the HOA to ask about the peeling paint notice we'd gotten right before I was admitted. I honestly believed that once I explained, they'd understand. I've been in the hospital. I'm a military widow. I'll catch up. In my mind, policy had room for humanity. I didn't know yet that to Karen, absence wasn't a warning sign something might be wrong. It was an opportunity. When they finally cleared me to be discharged, strict rest, no stress were the doctor's exact words. I thought the hard part was over. I thought we were going back to our safe place, the one piece of life with Mark that hadn't been taken. And for a brief, stupid moment, driving back into Cedar Hollow with my dad's pickup behind us and John snoring in his car seat, it felt like coming home. The townhouses lined up in their neat little rows, identical shrubs trimmed to regulation height, flags evenly spaced. I remember thinking, maybe this is where we rebuild. Maybe, just maybe, we get a second chance. And for a little while, it really did look like we had finally found our version of peace. Until the first courtesy notice from the HOA turned into a threat. Stay with me, because that's when I realized this wasn't just about grass or paint. It was about someone deciding my family no longer counted. The first courtesy notice was waiting for me on the kitchen counter the night we came back from the hospital. My dad had stacked the mail in a neat pile. The HOA envelope was on top, logo all proud like it was something important. Reminder, exterior maintenance, it said at the top, in bold. In the body, some copy-pasted paragraph about weeds in the front flower bed and stained driveway with a deadline, 7 days. 7 days. I was still walking like I'd been kicked in the ribs. My OB's discharge papers literally said, no strenuous activity. Avoid stress. I laughed when I read the notice, but it wasn't funny. It was that brittle, hysterical kind of laugh that feels like it might turn into sobbing if you let it. I told myself, okay, this is annoying, but it's just a form letter. Once I explain, they'll back off. People understand hospitals. They understand high-risk pregnancies. They understand widows trying to keep their heads above water. Right? 2 days later, there was another envelope. Same logo. This one didn't say courtesy. It said second notice. Failure to address prior itemized violations may result in fines and legal action including, but not limited to, lien placement. The violations list was longer now. Weeds. Driveway. Curtain visible from exterior does not conform to association standards. That one made me snort. The curtain was a cheap blackout panel I'd hung so my son would sleep through the streetlights. At the bottom, in small print, was the line that set the tone for everything that followed. Our records indicate no response to our prior attempts at communication. I stared at it. My phone lit up on the table with the hospital app notification. New test result available. My discharge bracelet was still on my wrist. No response. I'd been responding to beeping machines and nurses at 3 a.m. The only record I had was 4 drips and fetal heart rate charts. I called the number on the letter. It went to a generic office line. Cedar Hollow Management, this is Angela. Hi, this is Hannah Miller, Unit 24B. I just got a second notice. I've been in the hospital for the past month on bed rest. My dad's been here picking up mail and mowing. I didn't get any prior attempts. Keyboard clacking. Let me see. Okay, yes, you have open violations. Notifications were mailed to the address on file. If you did not respond within the time frame, it moves to the next step. I was literally admitted. I said, trying to keep my voice level. I can send documentation. I just got home. I just need some time. Well, she said in that customer service sweet tone that somehow makes you feel smaller, we can't make exceptions based on verbal claims. If you want to contest, you'll need to put it in writing. But the violation clock continues. The what? The clock. For fines. It's in your governing documents. In that moment, something inside me clicked. Not rage. Not yet. Just this cold, familiar feeling I'd had after Mark's funeral, staring at stacks of benefits paperwork. The understanding that to these people, my life was a file. And files don't cry. I hung up, opened my notes app, and titled a new page. Cedar Hollow, timeline, date, time of the call, who I spoke to, exactly what she said. It was 2 lines long. It felt stupid and small, but it was something I could control. That week, we tried to play along. My dad pressure washed the driveway on his day off. My mom pulled weeds while John chased a bubble mower on the sidewalk. I sat on a folding chair with my feet up, guilt chewing at me because I couldn't help more. 3 days later, another envelope. Final notice before fine. Same items. Same language about no response. No mention of my phone call. I called again. This time, Karen answered. Cedar Hollow Property Management. This is Karen. Her voice matched the blazer and binder from that first meeting, crisp, impatient. Hi, this is Hannah Miller, 24B. I spoke to someone named Angela a few days ago. I've been in the hospital. Yes, Hannah, I see the notes. Paper rustling. You were unavailable. Unfortunately, the association can't pause enforcement every time someone chooses to be away. Chooses, the word scraped. If you had concerns, you needed to attend the last board meeting or respond within the prescribed timeline. We have procedures. We can't deviate just because you're busy. Busy. I pictured the monitors on my belly again. I wasn't on vacation, I said, my voice getting tight. I almost lost my baby. There was a beat of silence. I'm sorry to hear that, she said, in the same tone she might use for, sorry the pool is closed. But the community relies on consistency. If we make exceptions for you, we have to make them for everyone. I bit back what I wanted to say. Instead, I asked, can you at least send me copies of every notice you claim you sent? And the dates? A sigh. You can submit a written request for records per the covenants. There may be a copying fee. I wrote that down too, word for word. Even the sigh. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Not just from anger, from the realization that, to her, I really didn't exist unless I stood on that sidewalk every day, waving like a lawn ornament. That night, while John slept and my parents washed dishes, I spread the letters out on the table like crime scene photos. Dates. Phrases. That repeated line. No response on record. On a hunch, I pulled up my hospital portal and lined the admission and discharge dates right next to the HOA timelines. Every deadline they'd given me had fallen squarely in the middle of some scan, some test, some doctor warning me about my blood pressure. I thought it was just a neighborly misunderstanding at first. An overzealous manager with a script. The kind of thing a calm conversation could fix. But looking at those papers, the way the language escalated so fast, the way my reality didn't appear anywhere in their record, something sank deeper into my gut. This wasn't a neighbor being picky about curtains. This was a machine that only moved forward. And at that point, I still thought the notices were the problem. I had no idea those courtesies were just the soft opening act. If you've ever felt that knot in your stomach reading a letter like that, hit the like button so this story reaches more people dealing with the same quiet threats, because what came next made those first notices look almost gentle. What I didn't understand, yet, was that the letters were just the polite mask. The real face of Cedar Hollow showed up in whispers and side eyes. The morning after that last phone call with Karen, I stepped outside to get some air. John was inside with my mom, stacking blocks. The baby inside me was doing slow, heavy rolls. I just wanted 5 minutes on the front step. 2 townhouses down, Mrs. Patel was pulling her trash can back in. She glanced at me, then at the HOA bulletin box by the mail kiosk, then back at me. She hesitated, like she was weighing whether it was worth it. "Hannah," she finally called softly, "I saw your name at the meeting." "The meeting? Last week. They had your address on the projector." She lowered her voice. "Karen said you may have vacated, and that the board was monitoring for abandonment." I actually laughed because it sounded so absurd. I was in the hospital. I called her. She knows that. Mrs. Patel's mouth tightened. She told everyone they'd made multiple attempts and you'd refused to engage. They passed around pictures of your front yard from the week you were gone. She kept saying, "We can't let standards slip. If one person disappears, others will, too." Disappears. Like I just decided to evaporate. Like my life was a missed trash pickup. People were looking at me. She whispered. Like, "Why are you still friends with the lady who abandoned her house?" The word hit harder than any threats of fines. Abandoned. I thought of Mark's boots still by the bedroom door. The toy truck he'd bought for John that I still couldn't bring myself to donate. We hadn't abandoned this house. We were clinging to it with bloody fingernails. That afternoon, I found a bright little flyer rubber banded to my doorknob. "Community pride starts with you." In smaller print, a list of problem properties the board was actively addressing. Third from the top, 24B, non-responsive, yard neglect, potential vacancy. They'd turned me into a cautionary tale. The shift in the neighborhood was immediate. Parents who used to let their kids chalk hopscotch on our shared sidewalk suddenly tugged them a little closer when they passed my porch. Conversations at the mailboxes stopped when I walked up. One guy I barely knew gave me this tight smile and said, "Hey, hope you get everything sorted. Karen said it's complicated." Complicated. That was one word for almost hemorrhaging while someone in a blazer turned my address into a bullet point. Even the board's friendliness had an edge. A helpful email blast went out to everyone about the dangers of absentee ownership and how abandoned homes hurt property values. No names, but the photos looked a lot like my siding and my driveway. I forwarded that email to myself and dropped it into the Cedar Hollow timeline folder on my laptop. Then I took a screenshot. Date, time, subject line. Then came the sticky notes. The first one was slapped crooked on my mailbox door. "Mailbox overfull, violation risk." Which was funny because my dad had emptied it the day before. The second appeared on my windshield after I parked in my assigned spot. Reminder, visual signs of occupancy are required. Required, as if my existence needed to be performed for their approval. Some of it was obviously coming from Karen. The phrases had that same plastic tone as the letters, but some of it was my neighbors parroting her like she was the voice of God. The board says if you're not here, you're not contributing. The board's just trying to protect us. The isolation worked, at least for a while. I found myself cutting my walks short, scheduling grocery runs for weird hours so I wouldn't have to answer questions in the parking lot. Every time I opened my email, my stomach clenched, waiting for another courtesy that felt more like a shove. But here's the thing about being slowly erased. Once you notice it, you start noticing everything. Every flyer, every email blast, every offhand comment about vacant units went into the folder. I saved them, printed them, highlighted phrases. I wrote down who said what in a little spiral notebook I kept by the coffee maker. Dates, times, where I was standing, who else was in earshot. From the outside, it probably looked like they were winning. The lonely widow shrinking further into her townhouse while the HOA protected the property values. What Karen didn't realize was that every note, every meeting where my address hit that projector, every whisper of abandoned was turning into evidence. They thought they were writing me out of the neighborhood story. They hadn't figured out yet that I was quietly writing a different story about them, one they'd eventually have to read aloud, line by line. The soft bullying turned into hard threats on a Tuesday. I was reheating pasta for John when I heard the mail slot clack. Another HOA envelope slid onto the rug like a snake. I almost didn't open it. Then I saw the words, Notice of Intent to Yolene. They'd bundled every violation into a neat little invoice. Lawn, mailbox, curtains, failure to maintain appearance consistent with occupancy. Daily fines backdated to the week I'd been admitted to the hospital. At the bottom, in bold, failure to remit full balance within 15 days may result in lien and recovery actions, including foreclosure. My stomach dropped. This wasn't about dandelions anymore. They were talking about taking the house. I flipped to the second page and saw something new, a line item for abandonment inspection, $175, and emergency securing of property, $250. In the margin, someone had stamped, Status, Potential Abandonment. I hadn't even seen the orange sticker yet. That came later. But on paper, they'd already decided I was gone. I called the number more out of reflex than hope. Voicemail. For urgent legal matters, please contact our attorney of record. Different number, different letterhead. They'd escalated without ever actually talking to me like a human being. That night, my dad came over and we walked the perimeter of the house with a flashlight. That's when we noticed the back gate latch had a new shiny screw in it, and the lock on my front door felt off. This isn't your deadbolt, my dad muttered. They changed it. I pressed my forehead against the door jamb and breathed. Somewhere in a file, Karen had turned a key and written abandoned like she was tagging an old couch on the curb. Inside were Mark's medals, John's stuffed dinosaur, the only ultrasound pictures I had of the baby still kicking inside me. The next morning, there it was, the orange sticker I'd eventually tell you about at the start of this story. Property determined abandoned by Cedar Hollow HOA. There was a smaller notice taped underneath from some property preservation company I'd never heard of, saying they'd been authorized by the association to secure and maintain the premises. Dates, check boxes, signatures, like a work order for my life. I called the number on that paper. A board guy answered. Yeah, we got a batch of units from Cedar Hollow. They said nobody lived there. We just do what the HOA signs off on. Did you go inside my house? Ma'am, if the lock was changed, that's the HOA's vendor. We just do exterior. A pause. Look, if it's a mistake, take it up with your board. We just bill what they approve. Bill. Approve. Units. Not one person in this chain used the word home. 2 days later, another certified letter. Now the balance included abandonment processing and an administrative fee for file transfer to Collections Council. They'd tacked hundreds of dollars onto my account, built on the lie that I'd walked away. I sat at the table, papers spread out, John scribbling with crayons next to me, my belly hard and tight with Braxton Hicks. I reread the phrase, may result in foreclosure, until it blurred. For a few minutes, I let myself imagine the worst. Some investor buying my house at a courthouse sale, my kids sleeping in my parents' spare room indefinitely, Mark's flag in a storage unit. All because someone in a blazer wanted to pad a maintenance contract and make an example out of the widow who didn't show up to meetings. That was the moment I understood they were not going to stop. Not because of reason, not because of decency, not even because of risk. I was a line item, and line items get harvested. If I kept calling and begging, I was going to lose everything. So I stopped reacting. I got very, very quiet. I pulled my laptop closer, opened the Cedar Hollow timeline file, and started a new section, Abandonment Actions. Every fee, every phrase, every date. I took photos of the orange sticker, the changed lock, the new screw in the gate. I scanned the hospital records with my admission and discharge stamped clearly. Looking at that growing folder, something in me shifted from fear to focus. They declared war using paper. Fine. Paper was exactly how I was going to fight back. And I needed help too. So before I made my next move, I want you to drop a comment if you've ever had an HOA threaten you with liens or abandonment. Your stories matter, and I promise they're part of what gave me the strength to push this all the way to the end. I didn't win this by screaming at a board meeting. I won it with something way less dramatic and way more boring. Paper. After that lien notice, I sat there with my laptop open, John napping on the couch, my belly tight and sore, and I asked myself one question. If Mark were here, what would he do? He was Army, but what people never saw was how much of his job was reports. After every patrol, write it down. Who, what, when, where. No feelings, just facts. Paperwork keeps people honest, he used to say. Or it hangs them when they're not. So I stopped thinking like a terrified mom and started thinking like a one-woman audit. First rule, no more phone calls. Phones gave Karen room to not remember. Email didn't. I created a new email folder, Cedar Hollow, and a canned subject line, account hashtag 24B documentation request. Every message numbered, every attachment labeled. Second rule, everything in writing cuts both ways. So I pulled out the thick binder of HOA covenants and bylaws we'd tossed in a closet when we first moved in. I made tea, propped my swollen feet on a chair, and read it like it was my job. Highlighted every section about abandonment, notice, right of entry, due process. They weren't as invincible as they acted. Even in their own rules, abandoned wasn't a feeling, it had criteria. No utilities, no visible signs of occupancy, returned mail, no response to certified notices. They had to meet all of them, not just decide I looked gone from the street. Third rule, build a timeline nobody could wiggle out of. I printed my hospital admission and discharge records with the timestamps. I pulled my bank statements showing HOA dues auto-paid every month, even while I was on magnesium drips. I asked my dad to write a simple statement, dates and times he'd been at the house, mowing, collecting mail, parking his truck in the driveway. He's old school. He signed it in blue ink like an affidavit. Then I started noticing their sloppiness. The abandonment inspection line item was dated 3 days after a photo on my phone of John chalking on the sidewalk in front of our house. The orange sticker notice said, "Lights off, mail piled up, no sign of life," but our porch light was on a timer, and my dad had emptied the box the day before. Their own pictures attached to one of the emails showed my curtains open and a toy truck visible through the window. I requested, in writing, all records pertaining to the determination of abandonment for Unit 24B, including photographs, inspector notes, board votes, and copies of any certified mail. I quoted the exact bylaw section that gave me that right. I sent it certified, return receipt requested, and I took a picture of the envelope at the post office counter. While I waited, I pulled the tracking number from the lien letter they claimed they'd sent certified before changing my lock. The USPS site said, label created, no acceptance scan. Translation, someone printed a sticker and never actually mailed the letter. Policy my ass. Piece by piece, the story changed in my head. This wasn't an honest mistake. It was a pattern, mark a vulnerable house abandoned, trigger a paid inspection, bill securing the property, hand juicy work to a vendor, roll it into fines, threaten foreclosure. If I hadn't come back, when I did, my front door would have been their commission check. That was the moment I stopped feeling small. They wanted to drown me in their paperwork. Instead, I was going to make it the rope they tripped over. From that day, every envelope from Cedar Hollow went straight into a clear plastic sleeve in a binder. Every email got downloaded as a PDF. Every conversation with a neighbor about what they'd heard at a meeting got a date and time. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was building a case. And once I had enough, I stopped playing just on their little HOA battlefield. Because if Karen wanted to hide behind policy, I was about to introduce her to something a lot less flexible: the state, the bank, and an attorney who loved timelines as much as I did. In that moment, I stopped merely surviving their harassment and started planning their fall, using years of quiet, boring consistency they never thought would matter. The first outside call I made wasn't to a lawyer. It was to the most boring place I could think of, the state's Consumer Affairs office. I sat at the table, John coloring beside me, my binder open like a war map. I pulled up the state website and typed, "Homeowners Association Complaint Abandoned Property." Up popped a page I'd never noticed before: Common Interest Community Ombudsman. There it was in black and white, exactly what Cedar Hollow pretended didn't exist. HOAs must follow statutory procedures before declaring a unit abandoned, including proper notice, verified inspection, and documented board approval. I read that line 3 times. Then I opened a brand new document on my laptop. State complaint, Cedar Hollow. All those weeks of timelines and screenshots suddenly had a purpose. I structured it the way Mark would have written a patrol report. Section 1, background. I kept it clinical: widow, high-risk pregnancy, dates of hospital admission and discharge, address, account number. No sob story, just facts. Section 2, alleged violations by HOA. I bullet-pointed each thing they'd done. Declared my home abandoned while dues were current and utilities active. Changed my lock without proper notice. Authorized a vendor to secure my home based on that false status. Assessed abandonment fees and threatened foreclosure. Under each, I dropped evidence labels: Exhibit A, B, C, the orange sticker photo with timestamp, the USPS tracking screenshot showing the certified letter was never mailed, the invoice that said abandonment inspection, $175, dated the exact day my dad's truck was in my driveway, confirmed by the Ring camera across the street. That camera was a gift. Mrs. Patel's husband had installed it, and when I asked quietly over the fence whether it ever caught my dad coming and going, he pulled the footage without blinking. We watched on his phone my father walking up my steps with a stack of mail the morning Karen's so-called inspector supposedly observed no sign of life. I asked him to email me the clip. He did, subject line, "For your records." Exhibit D. Next, I went after their process. I requested, again in writing, a complete copy of the minutes of any board meeting at which Unit 24B was discussed in connection with abandonment or legal action. This time, instead of sending it to Karen's generic address, I CC'd the association's registered agent on file with the state and labeled it Formal Records Request PR Statute. I sent it certified and by email. 2 clocks now ticked, theirs and the state's. When the minutes arrived in a badly scanned PDF a week later, they were everything I'd hoped and feared. There I was by address, on a projector, just like Mrs. Patel had said. Manager recommends designating 24B as abandoned to prevent blight. Under discussion, a line that made my jaw clench. Owner believed to have moved in with relatives. No visible occupancy. Opportunity to bring in preservation vendor per contract. Opportunity. No mention of my call from the hospital. No mention of my dad's truck. Just a unanimous vote, and Karen's signature at the bottom. I highlighted that word, opportunity, and pasted the page into my complaint as Exhibit E. Then I added the kicker, the clause from our own bylaws that said they had to make a good faith effort to verify vacancy, including attempted contact by phone and email. I attached my phone records showing exactly one outgoing call on my end and none on theirs. By the time I was done, the complaint packet was over 40 pages. I numbered every page. I built a table of contents. I cross-referenced exhibits. I wasn't just telling a sad story. I was presenting a quiet little indictment. I didn't stop with the state. I pulled out my mortgage statement and found the line about property preservation and occupancy status. Banks really don't like anyone messing with collateral without their consent. I drafted a second packet for the lender's fraud and property preservation department, swapping alleged violations of statute for unauthorized third-party interference with secured property. Same exhibits, same timeline, different audience. Finally, I sent a short, bland email to the HOA's attorney, the name on that lien threat letter. Please be advised that I have submitted formal complaints to State Ombudsman and lender regarding Cedar Hollow's improper declaration of my occupied home as abandoned, unauthorized lock change, and threatened foreclosure based on false status. Attached is a courtesy copy of the documentation provided to those entities. All future communication should be in writing. No threats, no caps lock. Just 40 pages of their own paperwork arranged into a mirror they couldn't avoid. Then I waited. If you've ever been in that awful in-between, done everything right on paper, and still not sure if the system will care, hit subscribe and stay with me. Because all that quiet logging and filing was about to give Karen the perfect chance to step right into the trap she'd helped build. When you drop 40 pages of receipts on people who thought you were too tired to read the fine print, they don't apologize. They double down. The first sign was an email blast to the whole community, subject line, emergency board meeting, integrity of association under attack. No names, but the body might as well have said henna. Certain residents, it read, are attempting to undermine necessary enforcement actions by involving outside agencies unfamiliar with our community standards. The board will meet to discuss protective measures and potential legal strategies. Protective measures. Legal strategies. For doing exactly what their own bylaws said I could do. An hour later, a separate email landed in my personal inbox from Karen. Hannah, we have received your extensive submissions. Please be advised that mischaracterizing the association's lawful actions may expose you to liability for defamation and harassment. The board has scheduled a special meeting to address the situation with your property status and account. You are required to attend. Regards, Karen, Community Manager. Required, like I was being summoned to a disciplinary hearing. For about 10 seconds, panic flared. My OB's voice echoed in my head. No stress, no confrontations. The idea of waddling into a room full of people who'd been whispering abandoned behind my back made my pulse pound. Then I read the line again. To address the situation with your property status and account. They'd just given me exactly what I needed, a public stage, with minutes taken where they would inevitably say the quiet parts out loud. I printed the email, slid it into the binder, and circled the words required to attend. If they were going to try to corner me, it was going to be on my terms. I RSVP'd in writing. I will attend. Please confirm that this meeting will be recorded and that minutes will reflect all statements regarding Unit 24B, including any references to abandonment and vendor contracts. Karen replied with one clipped sentence, as always standard procedures will be followed, which translated meant, yes, they'd keep doing exactly what had just gotten them in trouble. In the days leading up to the meeting, the pressure campaign ratcheted up. Another notice on my door about continuing noncompliance. A vague letter from their attorney hinting that false reports to government agencies may have consequences. Even a neighbor stopping me by the mailboxes to say, Karen mentioned you're creating a hostile environment for the board. Good, I thought, tucking that phrase into my notes. Say, hostile on the record, please. The real tell, though, was buried in an attachment Karen accidentally included in one of her reminder emails about the meeting. She'd meant to send just the agenda. Instead, she attached a draft abandonment action log prepared for the board. On page 2, under my address, was a column labeled Vendor Activity. Next to 24B, Abandoned, it listed Initial Inspection, Billable, Lock Change, Billable, Ongoing Lawn and Exterior, Billable, Contract, Minimum 6 months. At the top of the sheet, in a header she clearly didn't expect me to see, was the name of the company getting all that work, and the last name matched one of the board members. There it was. Not just overreach. Incentive. I printed that log. So fast my printer whined. Exhibit F. They thought they were circling the wagons. What they were actually doing was drawing a perfect, dark circle around the real motive, money. By the day of the emergency meeting, my binder was heavy. Hospital records, USPS tracking, ring footage, their own minutes, the vendor log with the matching last names, all cross-referenced to statutes and their bylaws. I didn't plan to go in there and scream. I planned to let them talk, to let them justify, to let them say on tape that marking my occupied home abandoned was standard and necessary. Because once they did that in front of witnesses with the recorder running, the state ombudsman and my lender weren't just going to see a file. They were going to see a pattern. So when the email came the morning of the meeting, location, clubhouse, time, 7 p.m. M, agenda item 3, 24B, abandonment/legal strategy, I closed my binder, hoisted John on my hip, and took a long, steadying breath. When they marked me abandoned, they thought I'd disappear. Instead, I was walking straight into their spotlight, every piece of paper they'd weaponized stacked neatly in my hands. And when they called my case, I knew this wasn't just going to clear my name. This was going to be the start of their collapse. The clubhouse smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner, folding chairs in tight rows, fluorescent lights humming, a cheap digital recorder blinking red on the table. I walked in with John on my hip, my belly leading the way, and that fat binder pressed against my side like armor. Conversations dipped. People stared the way they stare at a wreck on the highway. Morbid curiosity, a little guilt. Karen sat at the front, blazer even stiffer than I remembered, flanked by 3 board members. One of them had the same last name as the vendor on that abandonment action log. They all had little name placards, like this was Congress and not a townhouse clubhouse. She cleared her throat into the mic. I call this emergency meeting of the Cedar Hollow Board to order. Agenda item 3, Unit 24B. She didn't say my name, just my number. Ms. Miller, she said finally, turning to me with that tight smile. You've made some serious accusations against this association. We're here to clarify matters. For the record. She nodded toward the recorder. Good, I thought. For the record. I sat in the front row. John wriggled onto my lap. My hands shook, but not enough to keep me from flipping the binder open. Karen launched into her script. The board followed standard procedure. Multiple notices were sent. No response was received. Our inspector observed no signs of occupancy. To protect the community, we designated 24B as abandoned and engaged our preservation vendor. Everything was within policy. One of the board members chimed in, "We can't let feelings interfere with enforcement. If residents disappear, we have to act quickly." There it was, disappear. I waited until Karen said, "So, Ms. Miller, Unless you plan to retract these complaints to the state and your lender, we may have no choice but to pursue legal remedies against you for defamation. Every eye turned to me. I stood up slowly. Is this being recorded? Karen rolled her eyes. Yes, as always. Good. My voice came out steadier than I felt, because I'd like the minutes to reflect exactly what you just said. I walked to the table and laid my binder down with a soft thud. The recorder's red light blinked between us. First, I said, opening to a tab, here's my hospital admission record, dated the same day as your first courtesy notice. That's Exhibit A. I was on a magnesium drip while you claim I refused to engage. I slid copies across. A murmur rippled through the room. Second, I have here, flip tab B, my bank statements showing my HOA dues auto-paid every month, including the month you declared my home abandoned. That's Exhibit B. Your own covenants say you check payment delinquencies as part of abandonment. You didn't. Karen's mouth tightened. We're not here to debate. We're here to clarify. You said. I cut in quietly. On the record. I pulled out a printed screenshot. Exhibit C. USPS tracking for the certified pre-lien notice you signed. I read the status aloud. Label created. No acceptance scan. That means you logged a letter you never mailed, then treated my lack of response as justification to change my lock. Someone in the back sucked in a breath. Exhibit D. I went on Ring camera footage from Mrs. Patel's house. I turned my laptop so the front row could see my dad walking up my path with a stack of mail, date, and timestamp stamped big. That's the morning your inspector wrote. And I quote, no activity, mail overflowing, likely vacant. I flipped to the next tab, board minutes. Exhibit E, your own meeting minutes where you called my home an opportunity to bring in preservation vendor per contract. Nothing about concern for my welfare, just opportunity. I tapped the word. Under discussion, not mistake. Karen's cheeks flushed. Context matters. We have a duty to whom? I asked, because it's not to your own bylaws. I read from a highlighted section. Good faith effort to verify vacancy, including telephone and electronic contact, must be made. I called you from a hospital bed. Twice. There is no record of you ever calling me. Her attorney shifted in his seat. Ms. Miller, this is not a courtroom. No, I said, but the state ombudsman and my lender's fraud department are going to see this recording. I slid out the last sheet, the abandonment action log with the vendor column. Exhibit F, your preservation vendor, same last name as your board treasurer, 6-month minimum contracts that only kick in when you mark a home abandoned. That's one lucrative misunderstanding. The room went very, very quiet. I kept my voice low. You didn't just violate your own rules. You changed my lock, branded my home abandoned, and threatened foreclosure while I was in the hospital trying not to die. You turned my address into a revenue stream. Karen's composure cracked. It's just policy, she snapped. We treat everyone the same. If you chose to stay away. I chose to stay alive, I said. My hand rested on my belly. Policy doesn't erase humanity, and it doesn't override the law. I looked at the recorder. Let the minutes show I did not abandon my home. Cedar Hollow abandoned its duty, and every exhibit I just referenced is already in the hands of the state and my bank. Behind me, chairs scraped as neighbors shifted. Mrs. Patel raised her hand. Karen, she said softly, you told us she disappeared. You never said she was in the hospital. Another neighbor added, you said it was about blight. Not this. The board treasurer with the matching last name leaned into his mic. Maybe we should move to executive session. Too late, I said. This is already bigger than this room. And as I gathered my copies and walked back to my seat, I knew exposing them in public was only phase one. Because the real pain for people like this doesn't come from embarrassment. It comes when the systems they thought they controlled turn around and bite them in the wallet and the title to their little kingdom. If you've ever fantasized about watching a smug HOA get cornered on their own record, drop a comment, because what happened after this meeting hit them exactly where they lived. The fallout started faster than I expected. 2 days after that meeting, I got an email from the state ombudsman's office. Not a form reply, a real message with my name spelled right. Ms. Miller, we have preliminarily reviewed your documentation. Based on the seriousness of the allegations, we have opened a formal investigation into Cedar Hollow Townhomes Association. Attached was a letter they'd already mailed to the HOA, demanding every record tied to my abandonment and warning of civil penalties for false filings. I didn't have to threaten them. The state did it for me. 48 hours after that, my lender called. Not a robocall. A senior guy from their property preservation unit. Ms. Miller, we received your packet. I want to be very clear. We did not authorize any association to change your locks or designate your collateral as abandoned. His voice hardened. If an HOA is triggering vendor work under false pretenses, that's a serious problem for us. He asked permission to share my exhibits with their legal department and insurance carrier. I said yes and emailed a digital copy before we hung up. One more clock started ticking, this time tied to a multi-billion-dollar bank that did not appreciate anyone messing with its paperwork. Meanwhile, Cedar Hollow went quiet. No more threat letters. No more sticky notes. The portal that used to flash red with violation suddenly just showed account under review. Then a new name appeared in my inbox. Ms. Miller. Our firm represents Cedar Hollow Townhomes Association. We are aware of recent complaints and investigations. The board would like to resolve the matter amicably. Are you represented by counsel? I smiled at the wording, resolve, not defend. Amicably, not aggressively. The tone had shifted from, we'll sue you for defamation, to, please don't let this become a lawsuit. Up to that point, I'd done everything myself. But I also knew what Mark used to say, you bring backup when the other side starts blinking. So I called a local attorney who specialized in HOAs and consumer protection. First consult was free. I walked in with my binder. He flipped through it, whistled low, and said, they really picked the wrong widow. He agreed to take me on contingency. One strong demand letter on his letterhead went out to the HOA's counsel and CC'd the state and my lender. It was only 4 pages long, but it hit like a hammer. Unlawful lock change, wrongful abandonment designation, emotional distress, potential interference with a secured mortgage, conflict of interest with the vendor. It didn't scream. It just laid out what a judge would see. At the end, he added one clean paragraph. My client is prepared to litigate. However, in the interest of resolution, she will consider a settlement that restores her position and compensates her for the association's actions. That's when the dam broke. First, the lien threats vanished. Official notice. All violation fines and abandonment-related fees on account 24B have been reversed. They tried to phrase it like a courtesy adjustment, but we both knew it was an admission they'd overstepped. Next, another letter. The board has terminated its relationship with vendor name. The board member with a familial relationship to that vendor has resigned. No apology, just facts. Policy doesn't apologize. Paperwork just shifts. Then came the real moment I'd been waiting for, the settlement offer. My attorney slid it across his desk. Read it, he said. They agreed to more than just undoing the damage. They agreed to pay for a full rekeying of my home's locks and all security upgrades I wanted. They agreed to reimburse every abandoned status fee, plus interest. They agreed to cover my legal costs. And then the line that made my hands shake. In addition, without admission of liability, the association will issue a lump sum payment of $24,000 in consideration of Ms. Miller's claims. It took me a second to translate that into real life. I did the math out loud. That's almost 12 months of my mortgage. He nodded. They're scared of the bank, the state, and the conflict of interest angle. This is them buying quiet. I thought about the orange sticker on my door, about seeing abandoned under my address like I was some forgotten couch, about sitting in a hospital bed, paying dues between contractions. Part of me wanted to fight all the way through court to make them say we were wrong in front of a judge. But another part of me, the mom with a toddler on her hip and a baby's foot in her ribs, knew what Mark would say. Take the win that secures your position and lives on paper. We negotiated 2 more things before I signed. First, a clause that barred Cedar Hollow from ever again declaring my unit abandoned or changing my locks without a court order or clear statutory authority. Put in boring legal speak, it was a permanent shield. Second, a written policy revision to be circulated to all residents, spelling out real criteria and safeguards before any home could be labeled vacant or turned over to a vendor. No more backroom opportunities. When the check finally arrived, thick paper with the HOA's logo in the corner, I didn't feel triumphant so much as steady. I walked into the bank, endorsed it, and put most of it straight toward a dedicated account auto-paying my mortgage for the next year. The rest, I split, part into an emergency fund and part into a small education account for John. They tried to turn your home into a profit center. I whispered to him that night, tucking him in, "Now, it's your future instead." On paper, they'd branded us abandoned. On paper, they were now helping keep our roof in place. That was the thing about this kind of war. You don't win it with a viral confrontation. You win it when their own systems, their own contracts, their own obsession with procedure end up funding the stability they tried to rip away. And from that day, Cedar Hollow wasn't the same. Karen was still there, for the moment, but the aura of untouchable authority around her, and the board was cracked. Of course, as satisfying as it was to watch the numbers move in my favor, there was still one thing that kept me up at night. Because money and policy changes were one thing. Seeing the person who'd stamped abandoned on my life finally lose the little kingdom she'd built, that, I'll be honest, I still needed to see. If you've ever watched an HOA squirm when real accountability shows up, hit the like button. It tells the algorithm more people want stories where the paper bullies don't get the last word. The funny thing about winning a war like this is that there's no parade. There was just a Tuesday where I walked up my own front steps, no orange sticker, no threatening notes, and opened my own door with a key they had paid to replace. The settlement money hit my account a week after we finalized the paperwork. My attorney called and said, "Check your balance." I logged in, and there it was, a lump sum big enough to auto-draft my mortgage for a year and still leave extra. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once spread out lien threats and foreclosure language, and set up a new transfer, 12 months of payments straight from that HOA check to a separate account labeled House. Another slice went into John and Baby College. I stared at the screen and thought, you tried to throw us out, and now you're funding their future. On paper, they called me abandoned. On paper, they now ensured I was the most stable homeowner in Cedar Hollow. The community felt different, too. Mrs. Patel knocked on my door with samosas and an apology she didn't owe me. "We should have asked," she said. "We just believed them." A couple of moms started waving again at the playground, but this time with something like respect. One whispered, You scared them. Thank you. Karen didn't come around. We all got the email. Effective immediately, Cedar Hollow has engaged a new management company. We thank Karen for her years of service. No explanation. No goodbye. But a week later, I saw her walking to her car behind the clubhouse, a cardboard box in her arms. For a second, our eyes met. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something. Maybe it was just policy, or you went too far, or you ruined my career. What came out instead was nothing. She looked away first. I didn't gloat. I just said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "Paperwork doesn't cry, Karen." But sometimes it bites back. Then I shifted John higher on my hip, patted my belly, and went back to my house. The new management company sent out revised procedures a month later. No home could be tagged, abandoned without proof of delinquent dues, returned certified mail, multiple contact attempts, and, in bold, verification that no owner is hospitalized or deployed. They added a line about special consideration for military families and medical hardship. I printed that page and slid it into my binder, not because I planned on needing it again, but because it was proof the quiet war had left a mark. I wish I could tell you I walked away fearless after that. The truth is simpler and less cinematic. I still double-check envelopes from any office with a logo. I still keep a folder for every important thing. I still shake sometimes when a certified letter shows up. But now, when I sit on the couch at night and the house is finally quiet, I look at the mantel. The folded flag they handed me the day Mark died sits in a shadow box there. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to hang it. It felt too final, like admitting the story was over. After the settlement cleared, I took it out of the closet, dusted the frame, and mounted it on the wall facing the front door. If you stand on my porch now and look through the window, that's the first thing you see, not an orange sticker, not a threat, not a notice of abandonment, a flag, and a family still here. The HOA tried to turn our home into a dead file, a line item, an opportunity. All I really did was refuse to go quietly. I wrote things down. I asked for records. I waited out their deadlines. I let the same systems they'd used to crush other people work the way they were supposed to. I'm not special. I was tired, sick, pregnant, and scared. I cried in my car more than once. There were days I wanted to shred the whole binder and move back in with my parents. The only thing I did that anyone else couldn't do was this. I kept showing up on paper. If you're listening to this with a stack of HOA letters on your counter and that knot in your stomach, hear me. You don't have to win by yelling. You can win by being the one person in the room who has everything in order when the light finally hits. In that neighborhood, the war with the HOA was over. But for those who know the system from the inside, they know there's always another committee president somewhere who thinks they're above the law. Subscribe to the channel and watch the absurd